What would you do if your own daughter decided to bury you alive? Not metaphorically, literally. They drugged me. Dragged me like an old sack, left me behind a brick wall, breathing dust and silence. My name is Gail, and I survived. My name is Gail Richardson. I'm 77 years old. I've seen a lot in this life: wars, loss, bitter winters, and the birth of my grandson. But nothing prepared me for the day I woke up in a place with no windows, no time, no future, locked away in the basement of the very house I helped build with my own calloused hands, buried alive by my own daughter. The house was in the outskirts of Nacogdoches, Texas, one of those towns where everybody knows the name of your neighbors. The street was quiet, lined with tall sycamores that shed their leaves in the fall like they were silently grieving. And in that silence I was erased, like I never mattered. I remember the taste of the tea she gave me, a strange bitterness that didn't match the usual brand. My daughter Beatrice handed it to me with a smile I now know was fake. At the time, I thought it was kindness, but it was a sentence, a goodbye. Within minutes, the floor began to sway. My limbs grew heavy, and my mind sank like an anchor into dark waters. When I opened my eyes, there was only concrete, darkness, heavy, cold. The floor was damp, and the ceiling low. The smell of fresh mortar filled my nostrils. I touched the wall. It was new. They had sealed me in, behind a wall they built after I passed out. And by they, I mean my daughter, and her husband, Montgomery. He never liked me, always looked at me like I was just a piece of old furniture taking up space. But I thought she loved me, that despite our disagreements, she was still my little girl. The one who once fell asleep on my chest after her mother left us. The same girl I raised alone, washing dishes in diners and clearing snow from rooftops just to buy her shoes. The first few days, I don't even know how many, I just cried. I was sure I'd died there, alone, maybe never even found. There was no light, only a thin crack between two bricks where a faint breeze passed through. I could hear noises above, footsteps, voices, laughter. My daughter was living her life, selling my things. I heard furniture being dragged, and I was down there, buried alive, like I had never existed. I didn't feel anger yet. What I felt was a kind of pain that has no name, a mix of betrayal, abandonment, and disbelief. I talked to myself. Why, my girl? I whispered that until my throat burned. Hunger hit on the fourth day, maybe the fifth, who knows. My stomach twisted in on itself. I tried pulling from the wooden floorboards to chew, just to trick my body. It didn't work. But when I nearly lost consciousness, something shifted. I remembered my father. He used to say, "A man isn't who hits, he's who endures." And right there, in the cold, in the dark, forgotten, I chose to endure. That night, I felt a presence. It wasn't God, it wasn't a ghost, it was memory. The first time my daughter cried, the smell of her baby skin, the bicycle I built from used parts and red ribbon, and that's what kept me breathing, until one silent, airless night, broken only by the slow dripping of an old pipe, I heard it. 3 knocks, sharp, steady from the other side of the brick. I froze, held my breath. 3 more knocks. Someone was hearing me. Asterisk, if my story is touching your heart, leave a like. It helps this channel a lot, and it shows me that you want to hear more real stories like mine. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapters. And if you know someone who needs to hear something like this, share it. Sometimes, one simple story can change an entire day. Thank you for being here and listening with your heart. I don't know what surprised me more, that someone was knocking, or that I still had the strength to knock back. I crawled to the wall, dragging my knees across the gritty concrete floor. My body screamed in protest. My joints felt like rusted hinges. But I had waited for this moment, or maybe just hoped for it, for so long that pain no longer mattered. I pressed my ear against the bricks, nothing but silence. Then another knock, this time softer, hesitant. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Please, don't go." I knocked back 3 short taps, a pause, then 2 more, and that's when I heard the first voice I'd heard in weeks. Faint, muffled, but real. Is someone in there? I didn't recognize it. It was a man's voice, older, uncertain, maybe even scared. I shouted with all the air I had, "Yes, yes, I'm here." No response. I panicked. Maybe he thought he imagined me. Maybe he walked away. My voice was too weak, too dry. I slammed the wall again with my fist. Blood smeared across the bricks. I shouted again, until my lungs burned. Finally, a reply. "My God, hold on, I'll come back." And then nothing. I lay there, pressed to that wall, sobbing like a child. Someone knew I existed. Someone knew I was alive. I must have passed out. because the next thing I remember was the sound of metal scraping concrete. Distant, deliberate. I smelled fresh earth. The scent of soil stirred memories in me, planting tomatoes in the backyard, the way my wife used to hum while digging holes for rose bushes. "Hello," I croaked out. Then I saw it, a faint glow, a beam of light piercing through a small opening near the base of the wall. A hand reached through, dusty and trembling, and a voice closer now. "Name's Ezekiel. I live next door." I knew something wasn't right. He dug with his own hands. No tools at first, just a broken piece of pipe and an old garden trowel. It took hours, maybe longer, but eventually I saw his face. An old face, weathered, kind, eyes full of fear and mercy. When he pulled me out of that hole, I collapsed into his arms like a sack of dry bones. I weighed nothing. I was skin and ghosts. "Who did this to you?" he asked. I didn't answer. He didn't press, just held me tighter. That was the first time in over a month I felt warm skin, felt human again. Ezekiel didn't take me to a hospital, said I wasn't ready, said the world outside could wait. That healing came in quiet places. He brought me to his home, bathed me, fed me, laid me down on his couch and covered me with a quilt that smelled like cedar. He didn't speak much that night, just sat by my side while I slept, like a soldier watching over a fallen comrade. I didn't know it then, but that man had just saved my life twice. First, by digging me out, and second, by not asking anything too soon, because I wasn't just broken, I was shattered. The first morning in Ezekiel's house was the first time I felt sunlight on my face in what must have been over a month. It hit me through the living room window, filtered by faded lace curtains, and it felt like being touched by something sacred. My skin, pale and bruised, flinched at first, as if it had forgotten what warmth was. But then I let it rest there, eyes closed, soaking in the golden quiet. Ezekiel had left a plate of toast, eggs and sliced apples on the table near the couch. Everything about the room was old, the wallpaper, the furniture, the clock that ticked a second too slow, but it felt like a sanctuary, a place built from time, not trend. And for the first time since I'd been dragged into that basement, I ate without fear of it being my last meal. He returned mid-morning, wearing work gloves and smelling faintly of gasoline. His old pickup truck had a dent in the side and a sticker that read, "I break for birds." I didn't ask where he went. He didn't offer it. Instead, he handed me a cup of tea and sat beside me without a word, both of us staring straight ahead like we were listening for something only silence could say. "Your name's Gale, right?" he asked finally. I nodded. Double quotes. "Good. You remember it." That hit me harder than I expected. Like he understood that there are moments in life so dark, even your own name can slip through your fingers. I hadn't spoken it aloud in weeks. Hearing it again felt like someone handing it back to me. We didn't talk much those first days. Ezekiel was a man of quiet rituals. He'd leave food, keep the radio low, offer a blanket without making a fuss. He knew somehow that I didn't need questions. I needed presence. He slept on a recliner next to the couch, said his back was used to it. Every night I'd hear him breathing softly, that old recliner creaking with each shift. I started to find comfort in that sound. Proof that I wasn't alone, proof that someone, finally, stayed. The dreams were the hardest part. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, the smell of concrete still in my nostrils. I'd scream sometimes, other times I'd cry so quietly it felt like bleeding through my eyes. Ezekiel never judged. He'd place a hand on my shoulder, or leave a cold washcloth on my forehead. That was all. One night, maybe 2 weeks in, I asked him, "Why did you dig?" He looked down, as if the answer was buried beneath his boots. "I heard something," he said. "Didn't know what it was. But I've lived alone long enough to recognize loneliness. And whatever it was I heard, it wasn't just noise. It was someone not ready to be gone. That silenced me. Not because I didn't understand, but because it was the first time someone had seen me not as a burden, or an old man, but as someone worth saving. Days passed. I grew stronger, my voice steadier. The bruises faded, but the tremble in my hands remained. Ezekiel never rushed me. We'd sit on his porch some afternoons, sipping sweet tea and watching the world roll by slowly, dogs barking, wind chimes, singing, kids laughing to streets over. He told me little about his past. A wife gone too young, a son who never came home. His house was full of photos, faded black and whites, sun-worn frames. You could tell he had known love and grief in equal measure. That's probably why he knew how to hold space for someone like me. I still hadn't told him what really happened. Not fully, but something in me was shifting. A tiny sprout pushing up through scorched earth, because even buried alive, I hadn't died. Not really, not really, and for the first time in years, maybe decades, I started to wonder, what if life still had something left for me? Asterisk, it was Ezekiel's idea. We were sitting on his back porch one late afternoon. The sun was melting into the trees behind the fence, and the air smelled like fresh-cut grass and old wood. He had just poured me another glass of lemonade when he asked, almost casually, "You ever think about starting over?" I didn't answer right away. The question hung in the air like smoke. Starting over. For a man who had been buried behind bricks, whose name was now tied to whispers, rumors, maybe even police reports, it sounded impossible. But Ezekiel looked at me like he'd already seen the seed sprouting in me, like he knew that inside this old body was still a man who could be ... more. What would I even call myself? I asked, half joking. He took a sip, looked out at the sky, and said, "Icaro." I blinked from the myth. He nodded. Yeah, the man who flew too close to the sun. Didn't he fall? He did. But before he fell ... he flew. That stayed with me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on the couch staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me, replaying that name over and over in my head, a name that didn't carry my past, a name untouched by betrayal, by the cellar, by Montgomery's sneer, or Beatrice's silence. By morning, I knew. I wasn't Gale anymore, at least. Not the Gale they had buried. I was Icaro now, and in that simple decision, in that quiet reclaiming of identity, I felt something lift inside me, like my ribs had been a cage, and now the bird inside had room to breathe. Ezekiel respected it. He started calling me Icaro right away, without smirk or second thought, as if he knew that names could be bandages, not just labels, and that sometimes healing begins with letting go of the name that held your pain. He made me clothes from his old closet, cleaned me up, trimmed my beard, even took me to the local library when I was ready, far out of town where no one would recognize me. We didn't talk about what happened, not yet, but the silence between us was safe. He introduced me to the librarian as an old friend visiting from Montana. She asked, raising an eyebrow. He just smiled and said, "Man's got stories." And I did. But not all stories need to be told right away. Sometimes, it's enough just to be seen. The weeks passed gently. We cooked together, laughed more. I started to walk outside in the morning, barefoot on the grass. The air felt different now, thicker somehow, like the world was waiting to see what I'd do next. Icarus was supposed to fall, that's what everyone remembers, but no one talks about the courage it took to fly in the first place. And I had flown. I had risen from a hole, meant to be my grave. And with Ezekiel's quiet strength beside me, I was learning that falling didn't mean failure. It just meant I had survived something most people never face, and lived to look the sky in the eye again. There was no moment, no sudden declaration, no dramatic realization. It wasn't like the stories where two people lock eyes and the world shifts beneath their feet. No music swelled, no thunder rolled. It was simpler than that, softer, like the way a candle doesn't announce it's lit, it just is. It began with a hand. I'd had dropped a mug one morning, nerves still not what they used to be, and before I could reach down, Ezekiel did. Our hands touched, briefly, but something in that touch lingered. Not romantic, not sexual, just human, warm, steady. Later that evening, he placed a second blanket over me without saying a word. It was heavy, worn, smelled like the cedar chest in his bedroom. I tucked it under my chin and whispered, "Thank you." He nodded and turned off the lamp. That was how it began, not in fire, but in warmth. He never asked me for anything, never crossed a line. He didn't even sit close unless I invited it. But I began to feel it, the space between us shrinking. Not because we were forced together, but because it felt safe there. He made me soup when I had a fever one week, sat beside me while I shivered, reading aloud from an old mystery novel with his gravelly voice, stumbling on the long words. I laughed, even while sweating through the sheets, and that laughter felt like medicine. Sometimes, I'd wake from a nightmare, shaking, breath caught in my throat, and find his silhouette by the window, just sitting, watching the moon. He never said much, but when I saw him there, I didn't feel like I was drowning anymore. I was just floating, and he was my anchor. One afternoon, I found an old record player in the back closet. Ezekiel helped me set it up. The first song that played was Moon River. He sat across from me in his armchair, eyes closed, fingers tapping on his knee. I couldn't help it. I reached out my hand. He looked at me, just looked, and then, slowly without a word, he stood up. We danced like old ghosts, to men with creaky knees, worn-out backs, and too many stories. We didn't move much, just swayed, his hand on my shoulder, mine on his chest. The room was quiet except for the crackle of the vinyl and the hush of two hearts, remembering how to trust. I had never danced like that with anyone, not even my late wife. Because this wasn't about romance, it was about presence. About survival. About knowing what it means to be truly seen and still chosen, not for who you were before the fall, but for who you became after the impact. We didn't put a label on it, still haven't, but from that day forward, I stopped sleeping on the couch, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Because love, at our age, isn't about fireworks, it's about steady light, and Ezekiel was my lighthouse in the dark. There's a moment in every survivor's life when silence stops being shelter and becomes a cage. For weeks, I had been healing, eating, sleeping, walking again, even laughing, but inside, there was something growing, not rage, not bitterness, just weight, a truth that didn't want to stay buried anymore. I began to write. It started with one sentence on the back of an old grocery list. They sealed me behind bricks, but I still hear birds. I stared at those words for a long time. Then I wrote another line, then another. Soon, Ezekiel brought me a proper notebook, spiral bound with a blue cover. He didn't ask what I was writing, just left it on the table beside my tea. I filled page after page, descriptions of the basement, the sound of the water pipe that dripped like a clock with no time, the memory of the cold spreading from the concrete into my bones, my daughter's eyes as she handed me that cup of poisoned tea, the gentleness in Ezekiel's hands when he washed my back the first night I arrived, too weak to do it myself. I didn't write to accuse, I wrote to remember. One night, I read a page aloud to Ezekiel. He didn't interrupt, just sat with me on the porch swing, eyes closed, nodding slowly. When I finished, he opened his eyes and said, "That's not just your story, Ekaro. That's a mirror. Other people will see themselves in it." I hadn't thought about that maybe I wasn't the only one who'd been buried without a funeral. The idea began to take root. What if my story could be more than memory? What if it could be light for someone else stuck in the dark? But telling the truth has a cost. Some days I was terrified. My hands would shake as I held the pen. Not from weakness, I was stronger now, but from the fear that maybe speaking it aloud would break something inside me again. But maybe silence had protected me, and breaking it would invite back the pain. But Ezekiel always reminded me, silence never protected you, Ekaro, it only hid you. You don't need to hide anymore. I started practicing my voice again, reading out loud, slowly, gently, listening to my own words fill the room like smoke curling up from an old fire, warm, persistent, impossible to ignore. One morning, I looked at Ezekiel and said, "I want to go back." He didn't flinch. He just asked, "Why?" "Because they took my story from me," I said, "and I want it back." He nodded once, then said the thing only someone who truly loves you can say, "Then let's make a plan." We didn't talk about revenge. We talked about dignity, about timing, about how returning wasn't about punishment, but restoration. I wasn't going to burst through the door shouting. I wasn't interested in being a ghost that haunted. I wanted to return like a man who had been buried and bloomed up. Wanted to walk through that front door with my back straight and my name intact. Icarus, yes, but not fallen, risen. Returning was never about confrontation, that it wasn't about pointing fingers or raising my voice. I had no interest in shouting my pain at people who had long stopped listening. This was about me, about my life, my space, my dignity, and reclaiming it on my own terms. Ezekiel understood that better than anyone. We started slowly. First we drove by the house one evening just before sunset. I sat low in the seat, heart pounding like it had a memory of its own. The street hadn't changed. Same cracked pavement, same rusted mailbox, same crooked tree where I once hung a tire swing for my daughter. But the house, it looked different. My flowers were gone. The porch had been painted over. The wind chimes I hung after my wife died had been replaced with nothing. It was cleaner, colder, like someone had tried to erase any trace that I was ever there. They were living their lives beat at Rice and Montgomery like I had never existed. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just felt something settled deep in my chest. Not pain, not yet. Just knowing that this was the place I needed to return to. Not to haunt, but to stand in, fully alive. Ezekiel helped me meet with a lawyer friend of his, an old college buddy, semi-retired with a mustache too big for his face and a soft spot for lost causes. We used my real name, Gail Richardson, for the legal documents. No one had declared me dead. No one had even filed a missing person report. They had simply removed me. That became our advantage. With quiet persistence, we traced the ownership of the house. Turns out, it had been sold, but not fully. There was a lien. Montgomery had tried to flip it for profit, but paperwork got messy. Debt tends to leave fingerprints. After 2 weeks of patient maneuvering and a few quietly placed payments courtesy of a small inheritance I'd never touched, the unimaginable happened. I legally bought back the house where they buried me alive. Ezekiel was with me the day the papers were signed. He held my hand as I ran my fingers over the deed. I didn't smile, I didn't laugh, I just nodded. Because it wasn't joy I felt, it was justice. Quiet, still. Final dot. We waited 1 more week. Then, on a Saturday morning, under a sky painted with soft gray clouds, I stood in front of that house again, not hiding in a car, not buried in a wall, standing, breathing, whole. I knocked on the door 3 times, like the knocks I once heard from the other side of the bricks. There was movement behind the curtain, a shape, a pause. Then, slowly, the door creaked open. Beat at rice. Older, tired, eyes wary. She froze when she saw me. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Behind her, Montgomery appeared, bloated, pale, holding a cup of coffee. He nearly dropped. No one spoke. I stepped forward and said, "You know who I am, and you know what this is." I handed her the deed. She didn't take it. I placed it on the porch rail. Then I said calmly, "I'm not here to punish. I'm here to exist. This house is mine now legally, but more than that, it always was." She blinked. Tears rimmed her eyes, but none fell. I turned, walked away. They didn't follow. They didn't have to. I had said everything I needed with my presence alone. I had returned not as a shadow, but as a man who had been buried, and came back with a sun on his face. Asterisk. The first thing I did after stepping back into the house was walk down to the basement. Alone. The air was still damp, still cool. The walls hadn't changed, but I had. I stood there in the silence, the same silence that once tried to erase me, and I let it settle around me like a coat I no longer feared. I reached out and touched the wall, the one they built to hide me. It felt solid, real, but this time, it didn't own me. I chose to leave one small section of it untouched, just a patch of brick, maybe 3 feet wide, and above it, I had a plaque made. Simple, bronzier. They tried to bury me, but I returned to live. It wasn't a statement of revenge. It was a monument to survival. The rest of the house had to be cleaned, scrubbed of mold, dust, neglect. Ezekiel helped. He worked with the patience of someone restoring more than just walls. Every nail, every fresh coat of paint felt like rewriting history. I replaced the curtains, opened the windows, planted new flowers in the garden, lilies, and, of course, sunflowers. Always sunflowers. And on the front door, I hung a small sign that read, "Saturdays open for stories. Come in, be heard." That first Saturday, I didn't expect anyone to come, but around 11 in the morning, I heard footsteps on the porch. The doorbell rang, soft and uncertain. I opened it to find a woman in her 60s, holding a thermos of coffee and looking down at her shoes. "I heard you were telling stories," she said. I nodded. "Come in." She didn't speak for the first half hour, just sat, sipping slowly, her eyes moving over the room like she was searching for someone she used to be. Then she spoke, and didn't stop for 2 hours. Her husband had been gone 3 years. Her children didn't call. She lived 2 blocks away and walked past this house every morning, wondering why it always felt heavy. "I never imagined someone was actually trapped inside," she whispered, "and that you lived." I told her my story, slowly. Not all of it, not the basement, not yet. Just enough to show her that being invisible doesn't mean being unworthy. When she left, she hugged me. A long, quiet embrace between 2 people who didn't need to explain the shape of their sadness. The next Saturday, 2 more people came, then 5, then 12. Old men, tired women, teenagers who came with curiosity and stayed with wide eyes. Not everyone spoke, some just sat, but every single one listened. I never claimed to be a teacher, just a man with a story, a man who refused to be forgotten. The house began to change. It no longer held echoes of chains or walls. Now, it held words, laughter, pauses heavy with truth, tears that didn't need shame. Some brought candles and left them on the porch. Others brought letters, pictures, flowers. One boy left a drawing, a sunflower growing out of a cracked brick wall. I kept it framed in the hallway. Ezekiel was always there, at the back of the room, quiet, present. Our eyes met often. I didn't need to say it out loud, but I knew this space, this light, this healing. It began with him, and me. I was no longer just Ekoro. I was something more, a man reborn through the wreckage, a man who turned silence into sanctuary, a man who proved that sometimes the deepest healing happens not in solitude but in shared stories, spoken out loud, in a house that once tried to forget. I didn't expect him. Not really. I hadn't heard his name in years. Jasper. My grandson. The last time I saw him, he was a quiet boy with messy hair and a habit of collecting rocks from the driveway. He used to hand them to me like they were treasure. I always kept them, every single one. After I disappeared, I assumed they'd told him I was gone, maybe dead, maybe moved away. I figured I had become a shadow story, the kind families whisper about when they think the kids aren't listening. But one Saturday, as I was wiping down the kitchen counter, I heard a knock at the door. Not the usual Saturday knock. Not hesitant, not lost. This one was steady, purposeful. I opened it, and there he was, taller now, maybe 20, eyes like his mother's, but without the weight. His voice cracked slightly when he spoke. Are you Gail Richardson? I froze. No one had called me that in months. Ezekiel stepped in from the back hallway, ready to intervene, but I raised a hand. Yes, I said. I am. Jasper looked at me for a long time. Studied me like he was trying to match this version of me with an old memory he wasn't sure was real. Then he said, I thought I made you up. We sat on the porch. I made him tea. He didn't drink it, just held the mug, fingers wrapped tight around the warmth. He told me he found out I was alive from a neighbor. Rumors had started about the house, the plaque, the man who came back. I had to see for myself, he said, because no one in the family talks about you at all. That stung more than I expected. I asked if he hated them for what they did. He shook his head. I don't know what to feel, but I know I didn't want to be like them. That's why I came. I nodded slowly. That was enough. He started visiting every Saturday at first, just watching from the corner as I told stories to the others. He never asked to speak, just sat there quiet, still, like a seed unsure if the soil was safe. One day, I found him in the hallway, staring at the drawing of the sunflower growing from the bricks. You kept it, he said. I nodded. Why? Because it's true, I replied. Some things bloom, even from pain. He touched the frame gently, then whispered, I think I'm one of those things. That's when I knew, this boy, this man wasn't just my grandson by blood. He was my legacy by choice, by presence, by courage. He didn't owe me anything, and I didn't expect redemption from him. But the connection that grew between us wasn't born from guilt or duty. It came from listening, from showing up. From beginning again. He helped me repaint the porch that spring, cleaned out the attic, read aloud from my journals when my hands got tired. Sometimes we didn't even talk. We just sat in the same room, breathing the same air, and I realized something. Not all family is inherited. Some is built brick by brick, touch by touch, word by word, and in Jasper's company, I saw the possibility that the cycle of silence could end, that the next generation didn't have to carry the same weight. That maybe, just maybe, love could grow where betrayal once bloomed. Forgiveness didn't come to me like a flood, that it came slowly, like morning light inching across the floorboards of a quiet house. For a long time, I didn't even think about forgiving Beatrice or Montgomery. I was too busy surviving, rebuilding, remembering how to breathe. Their absence was a kind of gift. I didn't have to see their faces or hear their names. I could live in the silence they left behind, but silence, as I had learned, doesn't always mean peace. One evening I sat alone in the basement, the very place where they tried to erase me. The others had gone home, the lights were dim. I stared at the wall, the plaque gleaming faintly in the glow of a single bulb. And the thought came, clear as anything, I can't carry this with me forever. Not the story, the hate that it had become. A quiet passenger in me, not shouting, not clawing, just sitting there, heavy, constant. A weight that reminded me of what they did every time I opened my eyes. But I didn't want to wake up with them in my heart anymore, so I spoke their names out loud, just once. Not with venom, just fact. I said them like you say the names of ghosts before you let them go. I forgive you, I whispered, and I meant it. Not because they deserved it, not because they ever asked for it, but because I deserved peace. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't a doorway we walk someone else through. It's a key we use to unlock our own cage. And when I forgave them, the walls didn't crumble, the pain didn't vanish, but the room inside me got bigger, quieter, lighter. I never expected to hear from Beatrice again, but one rainy morning, I found an envelope on the porch, no name, just taped gently to the front door, soaked along the edges. Inside was a photo. Me, holding her when she was maybe 5, missing her 2 front teeth, face smudged with birthday cake, my arms wrapped around her like she was the only thing I had. On the back a single line. Thank you for not closing the door. That was all. No apology, no signature, just that, and strangely, it was enough. I didn't rush to call her. I didn't run to embrace her. Some wounds don't need to be reopened to prove they've healed. But I stood there, holding that photo, and I realized something profound. Forgiveness isn't about reconciliation, it's about reclamation. I had reclaimed my name, my story, my house, voice, and now I was reclaiming the space inside me that they had tried to fill with bitterness. I placed the photo on the wall beside the drawing. Jasper had left the sunflower growing from bricks. Two symbols. One of pain survived, the other of pain surrendered. Icarus didn't fall that day, he landed, and he learned to walk again. I never planned to become a voice for others. I wasn't trying to teach. I wasn't trying to lead. I was just telling my story in fragments, in Saturday gatherings, in quiet conversations over lukewarm coffee. But something started to shift. People came back, not just once, not just to listen. They came with notebooks, with trembling voices, with folded pieces of paper pulled from coat pockets and purses. They came with questions, with pain, with memories no one had ever asked them about before. And they came, most of all, with silence. The kind of silence that weighs on the chest for decades. One woman in her 80s brought me a letter she had written to her brother, never sent, about the night their father left. She asked if she could read it aloud. We listened, cried, hugged her afterward like she had just climbed a mountain. A boy of 16 came with bruises that didn't show on his skin. I recognized the way he kept his shoulders curled inward, as if life had taught him to make himself smaller. I asked his name. He whispered it like it was a secret the world didn't deserve. I like it here, he said. You talk like pain doesn't mean we're broken. I told him the truth. It doesn't. Pain means you lived. More people came, veterans, widows, nurses, nurses, men who never knew how to cry, women who had forgotten how to laugh. They didn't come for therapy, they came for truth, and I gave it the only way I knew how, gently, honestly, without pretending to have answers. Ezekiel started calling the house the lighthouse. It made me laugh. What am I warning them about? I asked him. You're not, he said. You're guiding them back. And I suppose that's what I had become. Not a beacon that shouts, but one that burns steadily. Not to demand attention, but to offer direction. The house changed again. We moved the chairs into circles. People started bringing food. Jasper made a wooden sign for the porch. Here, we speak. Here, we listen. Someone donated a shelf of books, stories of grief, survival, redemption. I started a journal that sat in the middle of the room. Anyone could write in it. Some wrote names, some wrote prayers, some wrote silence, just scribbles and lines and broken shapes. All of it was welcome. And in the quiet hours between gatherings, I'd walk the rooms, slowly, hand against the walls that once held me hostage. I didn't hate them anymore. I had filled them with light. I had proven that no one, not even an old man left for dead, is beyond rebuilding. I had become a lighthouse, yes, but also a garden. Something living, rooted in grief, reaching upward toward the sky. I never wanted to be remembered. That's the honest truth. For most of my life, I just wanted to matter to the people around me, to be useful, to be good. But remembered, that felt like something reserved for heroes or legends. I was neither. I was a man who stocked grocery shelves, a father who burned soup too many times, a husband who sometimes spoke too little and held on too tight. But now, walking through this house, hearing laughter echo in rooms that once swallowed my voice, I started to see it, slowly, quietly. This was legacy, not statues, not headlines. Legacy made of chairs, gathered in a circle of stories whispered between strangers, who become kin. Of silence, broken by tears that don't need explaining. Every Saturday, the porch filled earlier. People began arriving before sunrise, some driving in from other towns. They didn't come for answers, they came for presence, for permission to feel what had always been too heavy to carry alone. Jasper started helping me organize the journals. There were dozens now, pages filled by hands of all ages. Some wrote about grief, others about joy rediscovered. One man drew the same bird over and over, in different colors, every week. A woman left a single line. He listened, and I didn't disappear. That one stayed with me, because that's what I had needed, too, all those years ago, before the basement, before the bricks, before I was forgotten. I had just needed someone to look at me and say, I see you, you matter. So that became my quiet mission, to see people, not to fix them, not to change them, just to witness them. I started calling the sessions gatherings. Instead of story time, it felt more honest. This wasn't a performance, it was a practice of showing up, of listening with your whole chest, of letting your voice shake and still speaking anyway. Ezekiel once told me, You know what happens when one person tells the truth in a room full of people pretending to be fine. I looked at him. They all remember they're human. And that's what these Saturdays had become. Not events, but remembering ceremonies, a chance for people to remember their softness, their survival, their strange, sacred humanity. I never preached, never told people what to do, but one day an old man who had been coming for months leaned in as he left and said, "You saved my life, and you never even told me what to believe." That made me cry because it reminded me the most powerful thing we can give each other isn't advice, it's space, it's attention, it's time. And now, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset behind the trees, Jasper beside me, Ezekiel humming low from the kitchen, I realized I had become more than a survivor. I had become a root, place where other lives could grow. Asterisk, I've always known I wouldn't live forever, but there's a difference between knowing and feeling it. Lately, I've been feeling it. The walks to the garden are slower, my fingers tremble more. Some mornings, it takes me a while just to sit up in bed. I used to fight it, push against the stiffness, curse the pain under my breath, but now, I've started greeting it, not with joy, but with understanding. This body has carried me a long way. It held my daughter when she was born, it stacked shelves and shoveled snow, it survived bricks and darkness, it danced again in Ezekiel's arms. If it wants to slow down now, who am I to protest? Ezekiel notices the changes. He doesn't say much, but I catch it in the way he watches me climb the porch steps, in how he lays out the tea a little closer to my chair, in the softness of his voice when he calls me Ekro like it's a prayer he doesn't want to lose. Jasper notices too. One Saturday, he showed up earlier than usual with a notepad and said, "I think it's time we start recording the gatherings." "Why?" I asked. "So people won't forget." I smiled at that because what he didn't know was, forgetting doesn't scare me anymore. I used to be terrified of disappearing, of being erased. Buried not just behind bricks, but behind time. But now I know. I've already planted too many seeds to be forgotten. Every journal in the house is a part of me. Every story told here has my breath in it. Every person who walked through that door carries a piece of my truth in their memory. And when I'm gone, whenever that is, I won't be lost. I'll be in the laughter that echoes from the living room every Saturday, in the sunflower Jasper carved into the wood above the fireplace, in the smell of sweet tea. Ezekiel still brews exactly the way I like it, with too much honey and not enough patience. One evening, I sat with Ezekiel under the old oak tree in the backyard. We were quiet for a long time. Then I turned to him and said, "If I go before you, keep the house open." He didn't look at me, he just nodded once. "I'll keep the light on," he said. And I believed him, because some promises don't need grand speeches, some legacies don't need stone, they just need to be lived fully, honestly, and passed on through hands that know how to hold, not just how to build. I may not have many years left, but the time I have, it's enough, because I've already become what I was always meant to be. Not just someone who survived, but someone who made survival a home where others could rest. It began with a dream. I was standing in the middle of the house, barefoot, the doors all open, the sun flooding every corner. There was no sound, but I wasn't afraid. I could feel the breeze brushing against my arms, the floor warm beneath my feet. I looked down and saw sunflower petals scattered along the hallway, like breadcrumbs leading to somewhere kind. When I woke, I knew, not that it was time, but that it was close. I didn't feel panic. I felt ready, as ready as someone can be, when they've already lived two lives in one. That morning, I made a list, not of regrets. I'd burned that list years ago. This one was different. It was made of names, people, moments, lessons I wanted to leave behind, not in writing, but in motion. I called Jasper into the kitchen. He sat down with a worried look, already sensing the shift in the air. I handed him the list, and he didn't ask questions, he just read it in silence. On the top it said, "Things that matter when you're almost gone. Keep the porch light on Saturday nights, even if no one comes. Let people finish their sentences, even when it hurts to hear them. Never throw away a handwritten letter. Water the sunflowers early in the morning, they like to stretch with the day. Forgive people who never said sorry. If someone cries while telling their story, don't fix it, just stay. Remember that small kindnesses are never small. Tell them I was never alone, not really, because you both stayed." Jasper cried, not loudly, not messily, just tears that rolled down his cheeks, quiet and honest. The kind of tears that don't ask for comfort, they just honor what's been given. That night, I asked Ezekiel to walk with me one more time, through every room in the house. We started in the basement. He held my hand, The plaque on the wall shined with the same golden defiance as the day we nailed it in. We stood there for a long time, not speaking. Then we went to the living room, where the journals sat in piles, voices on paper, trembling and proud. In the hallway, the sunflower drawing was still framed, now surrounded by dozens of photos. Visitors had brought faces, smiling, hands held, candles lit. In the kitchen, the kettle whistled at soft, familiar sound. I sat in my chair, the one I'd claimed as mine over the months. Ezekiel poured the tea. He didn't sit right away, knelt in front of me, took both my hands in his. His voice cracked as he said, "You changed everything. You know that, right?" I smiled. Not everything, just what needed to be changed. He kissed the back of my hand, the one still rough from a life of labor, and placed it gently over his heart. That night, I wrote a letter, not to anyone in particular, or maybe to everyone. It said, I was not supposed to live, but I did. I was not supposed to be heard, but I spoke. And I was not supposed to be loved, but I was completely, quietly, and without condition. If you are reading this, I want you to know, survival is not just staying alive. It is learning how to live again after you've been convinced you shouldn't. You are allowed to begin again, even at the end, especially at the end. I folded the letter, placed it inside the journal on the table, and went to bed with the window open. The wind moved through the curtains like it was saying goodbye, but I wasn't afraid, because I had already said everything that mattered. With every story told, with every hand held, with every time I chose to stay. They found me the next morning, still and peaceful, in my bed by the window. The breeze had carried in the scent of rain-soaked earth. A bird was singing nearby. I had left the journal open beside me, its final page holding the last line I ever wrote. Here, I lived. I was not buried this time. I was not hidden, not erased, not discarded like some story no one wanted to read. I was honored. Mourned in silence, remembered in voices. Ezekiel didn't wear black. He wore the same flannel shirt I'd always liked on him, soft green, sleeves rolled, collar loose. He stood on the porch and greeted every single person who came to say goodbye, not with sadness, but with warmth. Jasper read my words aloud, not all of them, just the ones I asked him to share. He spoke with a tremble at first, then with strength, and then with the kind of grace only someone who has listened deeply can carry. People cried, laughed, held hands, and when the gathering was done, they didn't leave right away. They stayed, planted more sunflowers in the front yard, lit candles along the porch rail, wrote new lines in the journals. The house didn't fall into silence again. It bloomed, because the truth is, I never belonged to that basement. I belonged to every person who thought they were alone in their pain. To every soul who had been silenced, and found their voice again by hearing mine. To everyone who needed to know that even if they had been forgotten, they were not gone. I belonged to the light, and now, that light lives in them, in you. If you're hearing this, let this house be a promise that darkness is never the end. Let my story be a seed, that from the deepest places, beauty can rise. Let your silence be broken, even if it starts as a whisper. And if someone ever tries to bury you, remember this: you are not soil, you are seed, and where they tried to end you, you will grow.